In the mountains of Jiangxi province, a roar was heard, a sound that hadn't echoed through these valleys for over 40 years. Night vision cameras captured a silhouette moving between the trees, a striped shadow that was supposed to exist only in memories. But this powerful predator hadn't just survived. It had gone through something incredible. It was trained to be wild in the African savannah, thousands of miles from its home. This is the story of a rare tiger that almost disappeared from the face of the earth. But China brought it back to life using an unbelievable scientific breakthrough. And what happened next shocked even the world's most experienced biologists. This isn't a normal animal rescue story. This is the story of one of the boldest biological experiments in human history. An attempt to bring an extinct species back to life using technology that sounds like science fiction, but has become reality. It has everything: long flights across continents, dramatic hunting scenes in the African savannah, genetic databases that work like dating apps, and of course, tigers that had to remember how to be predators, even though their ancestors had lived in captivity for generations. But to understand how grand this story really is, we have to go back to the beginning, to the moment when the roar of the ancient kings fell silent in the Chinese mountains. The year 1987 became a turning point in the history of the South China tiger, though no one knew it at the time. A hunter in the mountains of Guangdong froze when he heard a distant roar, its echo rolling through the valleys before disappearing into the morning mist. He didn't know then that he had just witnessed a historic moment. It was the last recorded sound of a wild South China tiger in its homeland. That roar faded into silence forever, as if nature itself had gone quiet in mourning for a vanished species. In the years that followed, expeditions searched the forests, set up camera traps, and interviewed local villagers. But no one ever saw those graceful striped predators again. The South China tiger became a ghost, a creature that lived only in the memories of elderly farmers and in faded black and white photographs in science archives. The South China tiger isn't just another kind of big cat. When geneticists were finally able to fully sequence its DNA in the early 2000s, they discovered something amazing. It was the ancestor of all other Asian tigers, a living link to a time when striped predators ruled the jungles from China to India. Its genetic code held the keys to the evolution of the entire tiger family. Locals had called them mountain kings, and it wasn't just a nickname. Archaeological findings show that these tigers ruled the mountain ecosystems of southern China for thousands of years. They shaped food chains and kept the population of plant-eating animals under control. Their territory stretched from the subtropical forests of Guangxi to the bamboo groves of Sichuan. They hunted wild boars, deer, and even panda bears, ancestors of today's bamboo-eating pandas. But by the end of the 20th century, these kings had lost their kingdom, and it happened frighteningly fast. China's industrialization after 1949 turned ancient forests into farmland and industrial zones. In just 30 years, 80% of the tiger's natural habitat was destroyed. Poachers killed off their prey, boars and deer, to sell on the markets, and the tigers themselves were hunted for superstitious beliefs about the magical powers of their bones, claws, and other body parts. Traditional Chinese medicine created a black market where tiger bones were worth more than gold. Each tiger was a living treasure for poachers, and the hunting was professional and merciless. By 1990, there wasn't a single South China tiger left in the wild, not one. The species was officially declared functionally extinct, the harshest category in biology. That means that even if a few individuals still existed somewhere, there weren't enough to rebuild the population. But in Chinese zoos, just over 50 tigers remained. They were descendants of animals caught by local hunters back in the 1950s and 60s for zoos. These tigers were both a genetic treasure and a curse. A treasure because their DNA still carried all the genetic diversity of the once mighty species. A curse because most of them were closely related, which caused inbreeding and genetic problems. And these tigers had gone several generations without knowing what hunting, territory, or survival really meant. They were tigers only in appearance, big striped cats that only knew how to eat from a bowl and sleep in a warm cage. When zoologists first tried to release some of them into large fenced reserves, the results were sad. The tigers didn't know how to catch even a rabbit. They were afraid of rain, panicked at the sight of tiny bats, and could only meow pitifully to call their keepers for food. In the year 2000, the Chinese government made a decision that many international experts called madness, and only a few called genius. It launched Tiger Rescue Program No. 1 Inch. The goal sounded simple yet impossible: to return the South China tiger to the wild, completely from scratch, to turn horse-sized domestic cats back into predators capable of surviving in the harsh conditions of the wild. But how do you teach an animal to kill when it has been eating prepared food for 3 generations? How do you awaken hunting instincts in a tiger that has never seen live prey? The problem was that no one in the world had ever returned a large predator to the wild after it had completely lost its hunting instincts. This wasn't like giant pandas, which eat bamboo and, at worst, can switch to other plants. A tiger must kill to survive. It has to feel the fear of the prey, calculate the path of a jump, and know where to sink its teeth so that the victim dies quickly without injuring the hunter. These are skills passed down from mother to cub during months of training in the wild. So the team of Chinese biologists, together with international experts, made a decision that shocked the world. If the tigers couldn't learn to hunt in China, where poachers were a constant danger and there was almost no prey left, they needed a place where training would be both effective and safe. They chose Africa, a continent where big predators feel at home, where there is plenty of prey, and where experienced wildlife experts have been working for years. In 2003, the world saw something unbelievable. Chinese tigers appeared in South Africa, not as exotic guests in a zoo, but as students in the toughest survival school on the planet. The transport operation looked like a secret military mission. Each tiger flew in a specially equipped cargo plane, inside its own box with climate control, heart rate monitors, and a 2-hour emergency oxygen supply. Veterinarians were present throughout the entire 18-hour flight, tracking every vital sign. The plane carried tons of ice for cooling and special sedatives, individually prepared for each animal. China rented a huge private nature reserve in the central part of South Africa, 135 square miles of African savanna, where the South China tigers would learn to be predators again. The Lao Hu Valley Reserve is located in the heart of South Africa, in a region with a relatively dry climate, but enough wild game to train young predators. It was the perfect training ground, large enough for the tigers to feel free, but controlled enough to eliminate dangers like lions, leopards, or armed poachers. The choice of Africa was not random or an exotic whim. Unlike Asia, there was no competition with other tiger species for territory, no local poachers specializing in hunting tigers, and, most importantly, there was plenty of diverse prey: antelope of various sizes, zebras, warthogs, gazelles. African animals had never encountered tigers before and didn't have special defense behaviors against them. This made the tigers' first hunting attempts much more successful than they would have been in Asia. In addition, South Africa already had a developed wildlife management industry, with experienced specialists who knew how to work with large predators. They knew how to create safe learning conditions, how to gradually increase the difficulty of hunting tasks, and how to avoid injuries to both predators and prey during training. The first students in this unique survival school were 2 tiger cubs, a male named Cathay and a female named Shi Wang. They were only about 1.5 years old, just reaching the age when, in the wild, a mother would begin teaching them how to hunt. The choice of young tigers was strategic. Their behavior patterns weren't fully formed yet, so they could adapt more easily to the new environment. Their names weren't chosen by accident. Cathay is an ancient name for China, and Shi Wang means hope. These names captured the entire meaning of the project: to preserve China's natural heritage and give hope for the future. A year later, they were joined by Tiger Woods and Madonna, another pair of young tigers named after celebrities to attract attention from global media to this amazing project. This marketing strategy turned out to be brilliant. Global news agencies eagerly reported that China's Tiger Woods is learning to play golf with antelope. At first, however, the experiment looked like a complete failure. Tiger Woods, a young male already weighing nearly 330 pounds, tried to catch a wildebeest and got kicked in the face so hard that he couldn't eat properly for a week. His face swelled up, his fangs were loose, and his confidence disappeared. Madonna, a female with beautiful stripe patterns, was afraid to go near any prey larger than a rabbit. When she saw an antelope, she climbed the nearest tree and meowed pitifully, calling for the rangers to bring her the usual food in a bowl. Shi-Wang spent hours chasing gazelles, but couldn't figure out how to actually attack. She just ran after them in circles until she got exhausted. Cathay tried to attack a zebra and almost got killed by a powerful kick from its back legs. The experts started to doubt the success of the project. Maybe the hunting instincts really were lost forever? But after 6 months of hard training, a miracle happened. One that forever changed how scientists understood the depth of hunting behavior in predators. Surveillance cameras captured the moment everything changed. Tiger Woods was slowly creeping up on a young impala near a watering hole during the early hours before dawn. This time, he didn't charge wildly like he had before. He waited. He watched the prey's behavior. He picked the right moment to strike. His body took the classic ambush posture. Low to the ground, muscles tight, eyes focused on the target. And when he jumped, his fangs hit their mark with surgical precision, snapping the impala's neck in a fraction of a second. This wasn't just his first successful kill. It was the moment when a zoo-raised, horse-sized cat turned back into a tiger, into the predator evolution had designed it to be. The video of that moment became a sensation in the scientific world and is still used in animal behavior textbooks today. Madonna turned out to be an even more impressive student and quickly proved that female tigers often outperform males in hunting skills. She not only learned to hunt, she began using strategies not even seen in local predators like lions and leopards. One morning, cameras captured her driving a small herd of antelope toward a swampy part of a river, where they couldn't move quickly and became easy prey. This strategy, using the landscape to limit prey movement, is considered one of the most advanced hunting techniques used by big cats. No one taught her this. She figured it out on her own by watching the prey and studying the terrain. Even more surprising, Madonna began hunting at dusk. Not typical for tigers, but very effective in African conditions, where many antelope are less alert during those hours. "We were watching genetic memory come to life," wrote project leader Li Quan in his notes from that time. The tigers were somehow remembering things they had never learned. Every day brought new discoveries. Indeed, the tigers' behavior changed with amazing speed. They started marking their territory, something they had never done before. They began avoiding certain areas at certain times of day, instinctively knowing when and where to find prey. They developed complex ways to communicate with each other, unique sounds, body postures, greeting behaviors. All of this was written in their DNA and just needed the right environment to emerge. Shi-Wang learned how to mimic the sounds of other animals to attract prey, a skill seen only in the most experienced predators in the wild. Cathay developed an incredible ability to hunt in total darkness, using only his hearing and sense of smell. By 2007, Tiger Woods and Madonna had cubs, the first generation of South China tigers born with the taste of wild prey, not canned meat from a dish. It was a historic moment. For the first time in half a century, a South China tiger was born not in captivity, but in conditions as close as possible to the wild. The mother taught them to hunt real antelope, showing them how to track, how to attack, and how to kill quickly and efficiently. The cubs grew up playing with bones and skins of real prey, not rubber toys. They knew the smell of blood, the sound of breaking bones, the feel of living flesh resisting them. By 6 months old, they were already joining hunts, first as watchers, then as helpers. And by 1 year, they were catching small animals on their own. The geneticists watching this process were amazed. The behavioral programs, once thought to be lost forever, were coming back in just a single generation. But the project in Africa was only the first stage of a much bigger plan. The goal was not to create a population of Chinese tigers in Africa. That would have been an ecological disaster for the local wildlife. The goal was to teach the tigers how to be wild again, and then bring them home to China, where special reserves were being prepared for them. By 2010, the African reserve was home to 15 tigers from different generations, including cubs born to the graduates of the hunting school. All of them knew how to hunt. All of them understood what territory, competition, and hierarchy meant. They were ready to return home. Meanwhile, China was carrying out equally large-scale preparations for the tigers' return. The government allocated massive funding to create a system of nature reserves that would become the new home for the returning predators. The first and most important reserve was being built in the mountains of Jiangxi province, the same region where the ancestors of these tigers had lived centuries ago. 40,000 acres of mountain forest were fenced off with a special barrier 13 feet high, equipped with surveillance cameras, motion detectors, and even underground sensors that detected the movement of large animals. The fence was designed so that tigers couldn't escape, but people also couldn't easily get in. It was a fortress of wilderness in the heart of densely populated China. Inside the reserve, the natural ecosystem was restored. Special teams planted thousands of native trees, created artificial ponds, and built shelters for prey animals. Most importantly, prey species were brought in for the tigers: wild boars, deer, and roe deer. These animals had to reproduce and create a stable food supply before the predators arrived. Scientists calculated that, to support the normal life of 4 adult tigers, at least 200 large herbivores needed to be living in the reserve at all times. The work to restore the ecosystem took more than 10 years and cost hundreds of millions of yuan. But the result was worth it. By 2020, the reserve had a fully functioning mountain ecosystem, just like it was before human settlement. Alongside preparing the land, equally important work was being done with the local population. Hundreds of villages surrounding the future reserve had to understand and accept life next to predators. The government ran a large ecological education campaign, explaining the importance of saving the tigers and teaching safety measures. Farmers whose land bordered the reserve were given compensation for any possible damage caused by the predators. Special rapid response teams were created to immediately step in if there was a conflict between tigers and people. Local residents were given special communication devices and trained on how to behave if they encountered a tiger. This work was just as difficult as training the tigers themselves. It required changing the attitudes of thousands of people toward animals that had been seen as enemies of humans for centuries. In 2020, the moment everyone had been waiting for, and at the same time fearing, finally came. The first tigers returned home from their African mission. 4 tigers, 2 males and 2 females, all descendants of the first African students, were chosen for the historic return. The selection was not random. Geneticists analyzed the DNA of all candidates and picked individuals with the highest genetic diversity and the best hunting skills. Each tiger went through a full medical check, received a next-generation GPS collar, and an identification microchip. The Chinese government had prepared a special reserve in the Jiangxi Mountains, 40,000 acres of restored forest, fenced in such a way that tigers could not leave, and humans could not enter without permission. The transportation from Africa to China was a military-scale operation. A special IL-76 cargo plane, equipped with climate control and a veterinary unit, carried the tigers across 3 continents. The entire flight lasted 22 hours, with 2 stops for refueling and animal health checks. On board were a veterinarian, a biologist, and an animal behavior specialist. Each tiger traveled in a large individual crate equipped with a fresh air system, temperature and humidity sensors, and monitoring cameras. Throughout the flight, heart rate, breathing, and body temperature were constantly tracked for every animal. The sedatives were carefully calculated so the tigers would stay in a light sleep, but could wake up easily if needed. The release was scheduled for the early morning of October 15th, 2020. The date wasn't chosen randomly. Astrologers said it was favorable for new beginnings, and meteorologists predicted clear, calm weather. There were no ceremonies, no journalists, no government officials, only scientists, a few remote observation cameras, and 4 tigers in transport crates. The event was kept intentionally quiet. Any extra noise or movement could scare the animals and disrupt their adaptation. When the crate doors opened, the first to step out was a tiger named Dailun, which means earth dragon, a third-generation male born in Africa from tiger woods and Madonna, but carrying the ancient Chinese genes of his ancestors. He weighed 400 pounds, his fur was thick and bright, and his muscles were well-defined from constant training in the savannah. Dailun paused at the edge of the crate, sniffing the air of his homeland, land his ancestors had left half a century earlier. His nostrils flared as he took in hundreds of unfamiliar scents: mountain pine, damp earth, traces of wild boars, bird nests. Then slowly, with the dignity of a true king, he stepped onto the land of his forefathers, soil that his kind had not touched in over 40 years. Behind him, unhurried, came the others, a female named Shanghai, in honor of the city where her great-grandmother had once been taken from, a male named Lei Ming, which means thunderclap in Chinese, and a female named Mei Ling, beautiful grove. Each of them carried within their genes the memory of thousands of years of life in these mountains. And then, just like that, they vanished into the greenery, disappearing so quickly, it was as if they had melted into the forest that had been waiting for their return. For 3 days after the release, there was no news about the tigers. Their GPS collars showed movement. They were exploring the area. But they stayed away from camera traps and open spaces. Scientists were nervous. What if the adaptation had failed? Maybe the climate was too different from Africa's? Or maybe the local prey didn't behave like the antelope the tigers were used to? The temperature in the Chinese mountains was 27 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than in Africa. The humidity was higher, and the vegetation was denser. It was a completely different world, and no one knew if the tigers could adjust. On the fourth day, sensors recorded something incredible, a discovery that finally convinced the skeptics that the right path had been chosen. Dailun found a source of fresh water that wasn't marked on any map of the reserve. A small spring in a rocky gorge, hidden behind bamboo thickets, was flowing with crystal-clear water. Local rangers who had explored these areas thoroughly didn't even know it existed. And yet the tiger, who had lived his whole life in captivity and only a year and a half in the African savannah, managed to find it in 3 days. This wasn't a coincidence. GPS analysis showed that Dailun had systematically explored all the high ground, sniffed the air in specific spots, and searched for signs of underground water. He used skills that no one had taught him. They were encoded in the genetic memory of his ancestors. But this was only the beginning of a series of discoveries that amazed the scientific world. Night vision cameras recorded female Shanghai chasing a wild boar that weighed more than she did. Her technique was flawless. She used the shape of the land as if she had known these mountains her whole life, not just 3 days. She approached from the slope so the wind wouldn't carry her scent to the prey, waited until the boar entered thick brush where it couldn't run fast, and then attacked with such precision that the death was instant. Local rangers, watching through hidden cameras, admitted that in all their careers they had rarely seen such perfect hunting technique. A week later, something happened that completely convinced the doubters that the South China tiger had truly returned home. 2 males, Dailun and Lei Ming, had a territorial showdown in a valley between 2 hills. It wasn't a deadly fight, but a ritual battle, just like wild tigers do all over the world. First, they circled each other, growling, showing their size and strength. Then they stood on their hind legs and began boxing with their front paws like bears do. The clash lasted only a few minutes and ended when the younger Lei Ming acknowledged Dailun's dominance and backed down, making a special submissive call. No one taught them this. It was a pure expression of inborn behavior programs, passed down through generations and awakened by the right conditions. But the most important discovery was still ahead. Biologists noticed strange behavior in the female tiger Mei Ling. She began avoiding cameras, spent a lot of time in the same place, and started making sounds that had never been heard before. GPS data showed she had made a den in a cave on the northern slope of the mountain, but no one dared approach. Any interference could disrupt the adaptation process. Only after 3 months did a camera trap, placed at a safe distance, capture something incredible. Mei Ling was nursing 2 cubs. She had become pregnant back in Africa, but the birth happened on Chinese soil. These cubs were the first of their kind to be born in China in 50 years. No one knew that the tigress was pregnant. No one controlled the mating. The tigers simply lived their lives as wild animals, and nature took its course. Genetic testing later showed that the father was Lei Ming, which meant that the tigers had chosen their mates on their own, guided by instinct rather than scientific planning. The cubs were healthy, active, and from the very beginning showed behavior typical of wild tigers. They instinctively feared humans, knew how to hide in tall grass, and by 1 month old were already trying to mimic their mother's hunting movements. This was final proof that the project was a success. The South China tiger didn't just survive in its new environment, it had begun to reproduce. By 2022, the reserve was home to 12 tigers from different generations. But the most astonishing thing was how their return had changed the entire ecosystem. The wild boar population, which had been freely destroying local farmers' crops outside the reserve, dropped sharply. Boars became more cautious, spent less time in open areas, and stopped raiding fields. Deer and roe deer changed their migration paths to avoid areas where predators might be. As a result, they ate fewer young trees in certain forest areas. The forest began to recover faster, new plant species appeared, and the number of birds and small mammals increased. Even bird behavior changed under the influence of the returning tigers. Birds of prey, hawks, eagles, owls, started following the tigers, feeding on the remains of their kills. Magpies and crows learned to recognize the sounds of tiger hunts and would fly to the site to get their share of the meal. Vultures, which had almost disappeared from the area, returned and began regularly patrolling the reserve. A new food chain was forming, and at the center of it once again stood the top predator, the tiger. The ecosystem, broken half a century earlier by the disappearance of tigers, began to restore its natural balance. The success of the first reserve inspired an even more ambitious plan. In 2023, the Chinese government officially announced the launch of the Three Kingdoms Project, the creation of 3 independent populations of South China tigers by the year 2035. The idea was not to put all the eggs in one basket. If one population was struck by disease, a natural disaster, or another catastrophe, the other 2 could survive and help restore the species. It was a lesson learned from history. The concentration of all tigers in one region had led to their complete disappearance in the 20th century. The second reserve opened in the mountains of Guangdong, the historical homeland of the South China tiger, where the last wild roar of the species was heard in 1987. The symbolism mattered. The tigers were returning to the very place from which their ancestors had begun their sad path toward extinction. 8 tigers, including descendants of the African graduates and cubs born in China, began exploring a new territory of 62,000 acres, 1.5 times larger than the first reserve. Here the climate was warmer and more humid, the vegetation was denser, and the prey more diverse. This allowed the tigers to develop new hunting strategies and maintain greater genetic diversity in the population. The third reserve was being planned in Sichuan province, near the national park of the giant pandas. The idea was revolutionary, not just to restore tigers, but to bring back the full natural balance of China's ancient forests, where large predators once controlled the herbivore population. And those herbivores, in turn, shaped the plant communities. Scientists believed that the presence of tigers would change panda behavior, make them more active, and diversify their diet. This might help pandas become less dependent on humans and better adapted to life in the wild. Each new reserve was created using the experience gained from the previous ones. The latest monitoring technologies were applied. Each tiger was tracked through a biometric identification system, where cameras instantly recognized individuals by their unique stripe patterns and recorded the data in a cloud database. Artificial intelligence analyzed the sounds. The system could tell the difference between a male's roar and a female's growl, detect the animal's emotional state from its tone, and recognize signs of pain or stress. Drones with thermal cameras patrolled the reserve borders around the clock, preventing poaching and monitoring the movements of both tigers and their prey. But the most impressive technology was the genetic passport. Each tiger's DNA was fully sequenced, and a special program automatically selected mating pairs to maximize the genetic diversity of future generations. The system took into account not only relatedness, but also compatibility in temperament, hunting skills, and territorial preferences. It was like a genetic Tinder for tigers, but instead of profile pictures, it used chromosome maps and behavioral traits. The results exceeded all expectations. The inbreeding rate in new generations dropped to the level typical of wild populations, and genetic diversity even surpassed that of historical samples. International recognition came quickly. By 2024, China's South China Tiger Restoration Project was officially recognized as the most successful large predator reintroduction program in human history. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, reclassified the South China tiger from extinct in the wild to critically endangered, a huge step forward for a species once thought lost forever. Today, over 40 tigers live in the 3 reserves, and the population grows by 15 to 20% each year. Genetic diversity remains high thanks to careful planning and regular exchange of individuals between reserves. The project won international awards, including the prestigious United Nations Champions of the Earth Prize in the Biodiversity Conservation category. The methods developed by Chinese scientists are now being used to help save other endangered species around the world. India requested advice on restoring the Bengal tiger. Russia reached out for help in protecting the Amur tiger. Southeast Asian countries are planning to adapt China's experience to save the Malayan tiger, but the long-term goals of the project are even more ambitious. By 2050, China plans to establish a population of 500 tigers and begin releasing them into the wild, with no fences and no constant human oversight. To achieve this, complex work is already underway with local communities across southern China. Wildlife corridors are being created, strips of restored forests that connect fragmented natural areas. Compensation systems are being developed for farmers in case of predator damage. Special crossings are being built over highways and railway lines so tigers can migrate safely between territories. At the same time, work is being done to restore the historical habitats of the tigers. Abandoned villages in mountain areas are being turned back into wilderness. Old mines and quarries are being filled in and reforested. Polluted rivers are being cleaned and brought back to life. China spends billions of dollars on these programs every year, but the results are worth it. The country's forest area is growing annually, and the quality of air and water is noticeably improving. The South China tiger has become more than just a rescued species. It has become a symbol of China's ecological revival. Its image now appears on banknotes, postage stamps, and official documents. Children in schools learn the story of its recovery as an example of how humanity can correct its mistakes. Tourism in the reserve areas is booming. People come from around the world to see the resurrected tigers, and this brings millions of dollars in income to local communities. The story of the South China tiger is part of a larger transformation that China has undergone in recent decades. A country that just 30 years ago was seen as one of the planet's worst polluters has now become a global leader in environmental protection and species restoration. China has restored more than 173 million acres of forest, an area the size of Turkey. It has built the world's largest network of solar and wind power plants. It has created a national park system that protects 18% of the country's land, more than any other nation. Thanks to this environmental revolution, it became possible to bring back not only the tigers, but many other species once thought to be doomed. The giant panda, which until recently was on the brink of extinction, has now been removed from the list of endangered species. The population of the red-crowned crane in China has grown from just a few hundred to several thousand individuals. The pair David's deer, completely extinct in China at the beginning of the 20th century, returned from European zoos and is now thriving in special nature reserves. The finless porpoise, a freshwater dolphin native to the Yangtze River, has shown population growth for the first time in decades, thanks to the creation of protected zones and a ban on commercial fishing in key parts of the river. This transformation was the result of a major shift in national policy. China officially declared the building of an ecological civilization as one of its top national goals. The country now has a strict system of environmental responsibility, Officials whose regions show worsening environmental conditions lose their career prospects. Companies that break environmental rules are shut down permanently with no chance of reopening. A system of ecological red lines has been introduced. More than 25% of the country's land has been designated as areas where no development or economic activity is allowed. Investment in green technologies has reached record levels. China produces 80% of the world's solar panels, 60% of wind turbines, and 70% of batteries for electric vehicles. Half of all electric vehicles in the world are sold in China. The country has launched the world's largest carbon trading market and plans to reach carbon neutrality by 2060, decades ahead of many developed nations. The results of this policy are visible to the naked eye. Beijing, which just 10 years ago was choking in smog, now enjoys clear air and blue skies for most of the year. The Yangtze River, once critically polluted in the 2000s, is now full of life again. In Shanghai and other major cities, vertical forests are being built. Skyscrapers covered in plants that clean the air and create habitats for birds and insects right in the heart of the city. In the mountains of Jiangxi province, the roar that hadn't been heard for 40 years echoes once more. It is more than a sound. It's a promise for the future, a future where wild nature and humans don't just coexist, but help each other thrive. Every tiger's roar is a victory over despair, a sign that even the boldest dreams can come true, if humanity is willing to invest the effort and resources to make them happen. The tiger has come home after half a century of exile. It journeyed through the African savannah to remember what it truly is. It was born in captivity, but became wild. Its ancestors were believed lost forever. But their descendants now rule the Chinese mountains once again. This is not just a story about tigers. It's a story about how the impossible becomes possible when an entire nation unites with science, technology, and an unshakable belief that nature deserves a second chance. In the near future, children will study this story in school as proof that humanity can fix even its most catastrophic mistakes. And in the mountains of China, tigers will live, not as museum relics behind fences, but as the free rulers of ancient forests, just as they were always meant to be. The South China tiger has survived, returned, and triumphed, and this is only the beginning.